Hi, Laura here for Business Academy Online, and I'm wanting to do a little bit of an exam analysis. So, your exams are coming up. I've gone through what's happened in past papers, and what we're going to do is drill into each learning objective at a time. I will start with a caveat. Some of the more recent CIPS principal markers reports are just so inherently vague that it's really difficult to tell the exact topic that's come up. So we've got some slightly vaguer areas and then we can drill into some. But hopefully this will be useful for you. So we're going to start with Learn Objective 1 and we're going to drill into questions that have come up in this area. So remember that questions are set from the learning outcomes, and these are all of the topics that you could be asked questions on. So we've got 4 learning outcomes as part of Learn Objective 1. Learn Objective 1 is understanding and analysing the added value that can be achieved through procurement and supply chain management. So we've got comparing the concepts of procurement and supply chain management, analyse the different sources of added value, describe the categories of spend that an organisation may purchase, and differentiating the stakeholders of a procurement or supply function. And you can see here the learning outcomes that we drilled into, the bullet points. We've got 1.1 all the way through to 6, 1.2.1 all the way through to 1.2.5, and so on and so on. So any of these topics could come up as a question for you. So you might want to pause this and make a note of it or take a picture as we're going along. If you are a student of Business Academy Online already, then you will have this in your virtual learning module, whether that's Ruby or Diamond, they're in both of them. And you can see here that in July 23, there was a questions on stakeholders and a framework to use to analyze them. We had procurement and supply chain management. Stakeholders and framework came up again in March 23. 5 rights came up in November 22. 5 procurement factors, quite a vague one. Stakeholder and frameworks again, so you can see that's a very popular question. CapEx versus OpEx, stakeholders in general came up in November 21. We've got some 5 rights and KPIs, supply chain management, total cost of ownership, whole life costing. 5 rights again, added value, 5 rights, stakeholders, and whole life costing. So again, it can be difficult to get this information because the principal markers reports, the more recent ones, are very, very vague. However, I have spoken to past students and to get an idea of what's come up here as well. Okay, so focus areas where they've asked questions. I just want to put a caveat here. They can ask you questions on any of the learning outcomes. Just because it's never been asked before doesn't mean that it won't be asked. And just because something came up in July 23 doesn't mean that it won't be asked again in November 23 and so on. So they can repeat topics. In terms of 1.1, supply chain management is a topic that's come up 3 times. 1.2, we're looking at 5 rights, added value, and whole life costing or total cost of ownership. So 5 rights came up 4 times, quite popular. Added values come up as 1. However, sometimes added value and 5 rights are mixed together. Whole life costing and total cost of ownership has come up twice. 1.3, we've got capital versus operational expenditure, which has come up once. And then stakeholders is a very popular 1.4 topic, which has come up 5 times. However, it can be difficult to drill in to know exactly what they're asking for, whether that's a framework or to identify stakeholders or something along those lines. So this should help hopefully give you some sort of focus. Learn Objective 2 then. Once again, this is what you could be asked in terms of Learning Objective 2. So we've got, again, 4 learning outcomes. It's understanding and analysing the key steps when procuring goods or services. So really, the procurement cycle is what we're going to be talking about because we've got 2.1, which is explaining each stage of the CIPS procurement cycle, pre and post-award, analysing each stage of the CIPS procurement cycle in relation to added value. So here you're taking those 13 stages again, but talking about how we can add value all the way through it. 2.3 is about how you can use electronic systems through that CIPS procurement cycle. So what systems these are and how you can use them at the different stages. And then finally, we've got 2.4, which is one that has been asked and students tend to struggle with it, which is analysing the relationship between policy and process compliance and required outcomes. So here it's about the need for structured procurement and supply processes and understanding the balance between policy and process compliance and added value. And that can be a really difficult trade-off when we're focused too much on all the regulations and legislation we need to follow. That can then limit the supply base and vice versa. Okay, so that's what they could ask you. In terms of questions, you can see here that we've got key steps of the procurement cycle for July and May. This was very vague in the principal markers report, so it's very difficult to tell if there was a particular nuance that they asked in this. E-procurement systems or e-systems in the procurement cycle comes up in March 23 and November 22. Key steps of the procurement cycle, again, July 22. May 22 focused on that 2.4, the process compliance and added value. March 22 was the procurement cycle again, but this time linking to CRALGIC. November 21, electronic systems and the procurement cycle, so linking two of the areas together. Contract terms, again very vague, came up in July 21. How specs and supply selection can add value. We've got e-sourcing and e-tools coming up back to back in March 21 and November 20. Compliance and added value again, the CRALGIC matrix one again, added value and sourcing process compliance and added value. So again, you might just want to take a moment to stop and take a picture of these. And these are the focus areas. So 2.1 is the procurement cycle. So that's come up over and over again, including the ones that relate back to CRALGIC as well. That's come up 7 times. In 2.2, we've got specs and supply selection and contract terms, both coming up once. Again, we don't know the kind of nuance to the topic or question. 2.3, very popular e-procurement and sourcing systems or tools. 5 times they've asked that question, or topic, should I say. And 2.4, we've got compliance and added value has come up 4 times as well. So again, this just gives you an overview of what has been asked. Learning objective 3 then. So again, 4 sections for learning outcomes. We've got explaining the aspects of corporate governance. We've got it analysing the impact of organisational policies and procedures. A lot of the time students will try and avoid learning that because it is slightly more dry a topic than maybe drilling into conflicts of interest and so on. Structures is 3.3, the different structures of a procurement or supply chain function. And 3.4 is explaining the common IT systems that can be used by a procurement or supply chain function. What I would say is that you really do need to get to know this syllabus, know the topics, because then when the questions come up, you can say, that's 3.1.3 and so on. So in terms of learning objective 3, the ILO came up in the last paper. Inventory control systems was May 23. We've got organizational infrastructure. This one was quite vague, so I assume it was related back to structures as a whole, March 23. Procurement policies and centralized structures together in November 22. Procurement structures came up in July. Procurement policies as a whole came up on May 22. ERP systems was March 22. ILO reappeared in November 21. Again, stop the video and take pictures as and when you need. Governance in the procurement function was July 21. Devolved and centralized structures was May 21. Procurement policies came up in March 21. Centralized structures for November. ERP and inventory systems together in September. Structures again for July 20. Status of procurement in the organization. This is a smaller area, but still can be asked as a question. Was Jan 20. And then November 19 was ERP and inventory systems again. So if we look at the focus areas here, we have governance of procurement and ILO, part of 3.1. Governance has come up specifically on its own once, but I will say, please bear in mind that some of the more later PM reports, principal marker reports, are incredibly vague. So it makes our job really difficult. ILO has come up twice. Procurement policies as a question has come up 3 times as part 3.2. 3.3, you've got the status of procurement, that's come up once. And structures, that's come up 6 times now. So structures is a really popular question. ERP and inventory management systems as part of 3.4 have come up 3 times each. Final learning objective then. So once again, we have the same situation. We have 4 learning outcomes, and they all relate to the compliance in different sectors. So we're classifying different economic and industrial sectors as 4.1, analysing the impact of public sector for 4.2, private sector impact for 4.3, and the impact of not-for-profit or third sectors as 4.4. And remember, they can drill into any of those learning outcomes. So again, obviously, it's going to be talking about different sectors. The most recent paper was procurement in public versus private. Third sector came up in May. Private sector compliance came up in March. Third sector, again, these are quite vague, so we don't know exactly the nuance, came up in November 22. Procurement in the different sectors, so across all 3, or potentially drilling into things like secondary, primary, secondary, tertiary sectors as well. May 22, public sector and the need for competition. March 22 was private sector and market share. November 21 was the impact of public sector compliance. July 21 was across all 3 different sectors. May was third sector. March was procurement in charities. So again, third sector, but specifically about charities. November 20 was private sector regulations. September 20 was a great question. Manufacturing versus retail. I love this question. July 20 was public sector. January 20 was public versus private. And November 19 is manufacturing versus retail. So there isn't that many different types of questions that they tend to ask in Learn Objective 4, but it is very important that you read the question carefully and you check out the nuances in that question. What is it actually asking for? What is the context? And make sure you relate it back. 4.1, we've got the different sectors, so that came up twice. Manufacturing versus retail, which has also come up twice, and public versus private, which has come up twice. In 4.2, we've got public sector, that's come up 3 times now. 4.3 should say private sector, which has also come up 3 times. And third sector in 4.4 has come up 4 times. So it is worth understanding that nuance. Now, I do not know what's on the paper, and I want to caveat with the fact that pretty much anything could come up. It depends if it's mentioned in the learning outcomes. In terms of some of my areas that I think may be more likely, but these are just guesses and I will not be held to anything here. In Learn Objective 1, CapEx versus OpEx, capital versus operational expenditure, hasn't been asked for a while, so there's a good chance that could potentially come up. Total cost of ownership hasn't come up for a while, and I think 5 rights hasn't either. So those would be kind of my 3 areas. But again, it could be anything from those learning outcomes. In Learn Objective 2, I think that there's a good chance for a process compliance and added value question. Now that could look very different, but that's the topics that I think. In Learn Objective 3, I think maybe some procurement policies or potentially the kind of ERP inventory systems could come up. And then in Learn Objective 4, public sector or maybe the different sectors question here that you can see in yellow, asking about all 3 sectors could be more likely. But please do not just focus your revision on those. It could be on anything, and this is just an analysis. I do not know what's on that paper. I wish I did. So that's everything from me. I hope you found this useful, and I'll catch you back on another video soon. Bye for now.